Again, for an opportunity to present. This is a different project, a third project that I'm involved with in my retirement. I wanted to share with you some something that I've built into an environment where Schematron is being used, and the rules expressed by the Schematron expressions are being maintained by those who are allergic to angle brackets. And they don't want to see the XML, they just want to deal with information. And I am successfully teaching my colleague some Xpath in order to help with this. But to set the stage for this project, this is another deployment of a four-corner e-commerce model where trading partners are exchanging electronic commerce documents over a four-corner model network where there is an obligation that the content of the document follow data integrity rules. Now, I have insisted in this project that we call these data integrity rules and not business rules, because in the world of e-commerce, the term business is overloaded with the business, the way the companies are interacting. So I insisted that what we are dealing with here are data integrity rules, so as not to imply that we're dealing with a client's credit status, because that's a business rule. That's not a rule about the data. The project is being facilitated by the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. They have a department called the Business Payments Coalition. They have a mandate to streamline payments across the U.S. and try and get more payments to be electronic instead of paper checks, which still predominantly are being used across the U.S. and quite a bit in Canada as well. Paper checks are still the norm. And so they have a mandate to improve or streamline electronic payments. And part of that mandate is to set up electronic invoicing and electronic remittance advices after the payments have been made. It's an interesting legislative environment in the U.S. because nothing can be legislated. Everything has to be free market. Everything has to be done without any anti-competitive moves or requirements. When I spoke earlier of, when I asked the question this morning about the non-Schematron content inside of Schematron, if having that obligates the implementation of Schematron to be XSLT, that could be seen as anti-competitive, because there might be non-XSLT implementations of Schematron, and you can't keep those out of the solution. Everything has to be open. In Europe, there is the PEPAL network. It began as the Pan-European Public Procurement Online project. It's now just the word PEPAL because it's now in Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. And it's used around the world. There are other implementations of UBL, South America, and then this project, BPC, in the US, and they do have cross-border accommodation for Canada and Mexico. So, this is an environment where, as I said, everything is market-driven. The PEPAL project has a very central authority. Open PEPAL, or the PEPAL organization, runs everything. When they need a Schematron script to be written, they hire a consultant or a company to write it for them. And they get the completed solution, and they can dictate the environment that it shall be XSLT, it shall allow this, blah, blah, blah. In the US, We can't do that. We, as in the project, because I'm Canadian, but actually I think I'm right now the only active Canadian on the project team. But we have to create an environment using Schematron that is voluntarily contributed to by the entire committee. There is no budget to go and hire someone to do this. So I'm doing this, setting this up on a volunteer basis, where I'm doing the mechanics behind the scenes. I'm not a business guy. It's my wife who runs my company, not me. And so I wanted to share with you what I've done in my environment that I am presenting to this team of business people, non-programmers, who know business, but they don't know XML, and they don't know Schematron for sure. And my immediate colleague at the Federal Reserve Bank, Britta, she is helping with the environment that I've created here. She is learning Xpath very quickly, very well. I'm very proud of her. And we are producing this environment. And surprise, surprise, it's based on a spreadsheet. I think you've seen me use it. Now, we have created a spreadsheet of the semantic model of those components of a UBL document that are specific to the US marketplace with cross-border consideration for Mexico and Canada. And this is a 300-row spreadsheet. And of those 300 rows, maybe 50 of them have Schematron assertions in them. And so there's a navigation issue. I'm showing a couple of excerpts from the screen here. Column 1 is the row number of the spreadsheet. Column A, or the first column, the row column you can see on the left, 1 to N. The column A are the identifiers as numbered by the BPC. That's supposed to be the North American business term number 96 and the North American business term number 102, which both deal with the tax category because that's the context. The Schematron assertion about that context is the count expression, or in the second case, this is where I was mentioning this morning. I can't build in the code list functionality into the Schematron script. I have to make it external, so a non-XSLT implementation of this Schematron script can have their own implementation of the function called BPC code list. And it checks the child value ID against an identified code list from the UN. The next two columns, and this brings up an interesting discussion about the use of the English language in these contexts. Column M is the error message to be reported when someone runs data against this and the assertion fails. This is in the active voice. You have done something wrong. Now, the data integrity rule is in the passive voice. This is what must be true. And this was a topic of discussion. How do we do these messages? Because we don't want the user to see a message and have to interpret it. And that's like the data integrity rule. If we just say you cannot have more than one as an error message, that leaves a bit of interpretation up to the reader to what does that mean? Whereas we say, hey, more than one exists. You've done something wrong. So we use the active voice for the Schematron error message, but we document the data integrity rule in kind of a passive voice as this is what has to be true. The non-Xpath character at the beginning of those rows in column K, the use of the octothorpe or hash, or however you want to call it, tic-tac-toe, whatever. The invoice and the credit note have a lot of shared rules, and we don't want a maintenance headache of having to do this twice. So out of thin air, I chose the octothorpe as the character that is replaced with the collapsed name of the document type, which is found in the spreadsheet tab separated by a comma. So this produces two Schematron rules. One is /invoice:/invoice /CAC blah blah blah, and the other one is /credit note: credit note /allowance charge blah blah blah. I cannot use an asterisk here. Well, I could use an asterisk here, but there are other places in the model where the document type name is part of the element name. Invoice line and credit note line both have the same rules applied, and so I'm using the octothorpe to collapse the replacement of the document type name. So this is presented to the community, and the community comes back to Britta and myself, and they say, hey, we think this is wrong. The way you've expressed the data integrity rule is wrong, and so that means, oh, then this must be the error message. And it's interesting because they come back and they say, this is what the error message should be, and then Britta and I figure out what the assertion is to trigger that error message. So this is really trying to be user-driven. I'm not trying to second-guess what they want. I want them to tell me what the error message is, and then I will figure out what the Schematron assertion is in the given context. And this is only about 40 or 50 rows of the 300 rows, and so scrolling through a spreadsheet is sometimes awkward. What happens, and here I need to acknowledge Arlen Bergheim, who is in the audience here. He's the one who taught me how to trigger GitHub actions. I showed you yesterday about the GitHub actions that produce the schemas. Well, in this project, at this repo that you have access to, are all of my sources where on push, the GitHub action will fetch that spreadsheet. It will convert it into an XML representation of a table, and we've chosen the generic code vocabulary from Oasis. And using XSLT, I produce all of the Schematron's scripts that are required, the XSLT wrappers that are required. Remember, I mentioned this morning I have a wrapper that pulls in the result of Schematron to XSLT, along with importing the implementation of all of the functions in the BPC namespace. Those Schematrons then go through, help me again with the pronunciation of Schilest? What's that? Schixel. Okay. What's that? I'm so sorry. Oh. With the I'm so sorry processor. And so I produce the XSLTs from that, and then at runtime, they are incorporated into the invoking wrapper that I generated in step 3. So the step 3 is the wrapper that pulls in step 5 plus the implementation of BPC code list in step 6. That is run in step 7 and producing SVRL, and then I make that SVRL legible to the user community. And then that's what I say here. So, something that I've never seen before, but I had the idea that this would help my users, has proved to be very useful. And that is embedding into patterns and assertions Xpath comments with the navigation that helps the user go back to the spreadsheet to find exactly where the error message is, where the data assertion rule is, and helps Britta and myself go and find and fix a problem that there might be. So I've actually, you can see how the rule has two The context makes reference to two business terms, 96 and 101, found on rows 166 and 175 in the spreadsheet tab invoice, credit note. And we can get right to those two contexts. The assertion, we actually put the information about that one assertion, which is 96, row 166 in that tab, in the message itself. So when it shows up in any error message of any Schematron processor, not just the ones that I'm doing, every Schematron processor that runs this and reports the context information includes the navigation information for the user to go to the documentation and find out what it is they did wrong. This has been a godsend, and I offer that as a tip, that throw this into your assertions and your contexts, and you can help your users interpret your error messages. If you remember nothing else, I hope you remember that. So SVRL is lovely because I can now massage the output for my user base, because my user base probably is not looking forward to seeing /q, :urn, blah, blah, blah. And so I am massaging this, turning all of the namespace URIs into the well-documented for UBL convention of prefixes. Of course, users may be using any prefix that they want, but in the UBL project, we have established a set of prefixes for documentation purposes that are associated with the namespace URIs, and so I convert that to them, and there is error message number 2, specification not valid. I put the context, space/space, and then the assertion, and the assertion includes the navigation information. Now, knowing that the navigation information is going to be in two places, I've chosen to suppress it in the context, because remember, the context had all of the different rows, and I don't want to confuse the reader. So in my SVRL, I suppress the Xpath comment that has all of the many different assertions for the one context, but I preserve it in the assertion message so that people can jump right to row 41 in that invoice tab for business term number 24 and read on more about the data assertion. That comes in really handy with the lengthy URI used for namespaces in the UBL project. You can see how that long failed assertion really gets nicely compressed into something that the user can read. And from my point of view, the reason I used space/space, which you can see at the end of the second last line, is that I can copy and paste all of that XPath address into Oxygen and find my data. So I've composed the error message to be useful for me as well, so I can jump. That's why I chose space/space as the separator between the context and the assertion. And I drop it into Oxygen, and I get right to the element that has the problem. Don't know if you folks do that, but there's another tip that I find handy. I really like Schexel. Thank you. Sorry I named it that way, processor. Because of the SVRL shadowed assertion statement. When I successfully hit an assert, and I successfully hit a failed assertion and I make a report, in the SVRL, I'm also informed of those rules that were never checked because they are shadowed by the rule that was triggered. Well, that's on me. That's not on my user. That's on me to go back to my spreadsheet and write the contexts and assertions in such a way that none of them are ever going to get shadowed. But I don't know that a priori. I can't analyze my spreadsheet to know that that's going to happen. And so I have documented for my user community this concept of an internal error. Please, Mr. User, the messages that are reported, and this is a shell script and a Windows batch file that people can run in their environment, and there's people can do drag and drop in Windows or a shell script invocation and have the schema validation, phase 1, and then the BPC validation, phase 2. Do you remember my diagram from yesterday, the two-phase validation of UBL? This fits into that model. And the second phase runs the XSLT that wraps the Schematron and my BPC code list, produces these error messages. The user, you have 2 errors, count of data errors, 2, and there find the documentation in that report as to where to look for on the spreadsheet. But by the way, there is an internal error. Please tell Ken. There is something wrong. And so, but you see, they understand an internal error. They wouldn't understand a shadowed, failed assertion, blah, blah, blah. So I've couched this in a way that so far they understand, and they let the team know, hey, I've got this internal error. This is something that needs to be fixed. Since Schematron reports an XSL message that is a terminate, I have to say, oh, by the way, the following error report is simply the exit mechanism and can be ignored. So I am informing. I don't know if there's an invocation option that I can ignore the terminate message in the output. Maybe I add that as a feature request in Schematron, since it's... It depends how you're running. If you're running from the command line, it's quite hard to do, but if you're running from the API... Oh, no, I am running command. Everything's command line. It would be tricky, okay. Because I'd have a feature request for a command line option to suppress that, please. Because right now I have to explain to my users, hey, this is not an error. It says error, but hey, it's not one. So, for you, I thought, okay, what are my questions for you to help me? I could only think of one. What do I do about that dang octothorpe here? Is there some... I don't want a complex XPath expression. Is there a better character? Right now, the octothorpe isn't being used in XPath, so I just picked it out of thin air. Can someone recommend a better syntax for what I'm trying to express here as a substitution? Think on it. Let me know if you think of anything else. And actually, I'm going to leave that up. I thank you for your attention. The project is still underway. They're entering the second market pilot phase in the next couple of weeks. We're building up on this. Again, it's on a voluntary basis. It hasn't been complete, but we're plugging away as free time allows. The US is finally going to have a nationwide specification for electronic invoicing, which will be a major accomplishment, I think. So I'm quite excited to see that happening. The folks at the BPC are working very hard to get this done, so I want to commend them on their efforts to bring this to the marketplace. Now, the ball has to be picked up by the marketplace. There is no mandate in the US government to run this network. The only mandate is to specify a network that can be run in the marketplace in a fair manner with proper competition at all stages, at all levels, that no disenfranchisation of any party can be in the specifications, and then they are going to say, okay, here, marketplace is the specification of the US invoicing network, run with it. So a bit different than what we've been talking about the past couple of days. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Ken. You're using these Xpath comments in your expressions to show you where this thing was in the spreadsheet. Are you aware that Schematron actually has mechanisms to do that in a structured way?
The documentation.
Yeah, there are things called Schematron properties.
Yes.
That you can use to add this kind of information in a structured way in XML elements or in whatever you want. I don't say you have to do it, but just
no. In consideration of that, I felt that this was going to be more expedient for all of the possible implementations.
Okay.
Because this was compact, it's readily available in SVRL, as are the structured components, yes. But I had considered it, and I chose not to use it.
Okay.
I don't think there's a penalty for not having used it. I just
actually, I know this from a different use case for. I know this for a different use case for processing EDI healthcare data and validating encounter submissions.
Okay.
And we also used a spreadsheet, and the idea was that the business people or the EDI analysts, they are correcting the Xpath expressions in your Schematron assertion columns on their own.
Wow.
But this did not work out because there were far more analysts than programmers. And
yes.
In the end, all the programmers has to fix the spreadsheet, and then we had a lot of input, you know, and so it was the spreadsheet idea did not work out for a bigger team, so to say.
Okay.
And I think
may I comment on that?
Just one more idea. I think a good solution would be if we could pimp the spreadsheet to just put the errors into red or something, you know, like a validation in the spreadsheet, like you have in an IDE or something.
So what would be red?
It's if there is a typo in the expression, right? So.
Oh, I see.
So to fix a spreadsheet.
Well, this is a Google spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So I have no. Well, I choose not to implement the feedback in order to go back and flag that red. But as I mentioned, Britta and I are focused on columns K and L. We ask the user community to focus on M and N, because if they can express in English what the error message is, then the responsibility comes to us, Britta and myself, to do the Xpath. We're not asking them to do the Xpath, but we are asking them, many times we've gone back to them and say, hey, that error message is ambiguous. Like, you haven't thought this through yet. You haven't. So, sure enough, we clean up the error message. We clean up the data integrity rule. The business person agrees this is the rule, agrees a violation of this rule produces this message. When they agree, then we write the Xpath.
It's a lot smarter on the analyst side, I see.
Yeah, well, lessons learned. It was painful at one point.
Josh Bina from Oxygen. When I try to get some non-technical users to implement Schematron rules,
yes,
I use that on top of abstract patterns, because abstract patterns allow to define basically like an intention, like a rule in an abstract way.
Yes, and apply to different contexts.
Set some parameters.
Yes.
And then that simplifies a lot. You know what? For instance, I have a rule. I use this to implement a style guide, right? So there is a rule that says restrict the number of words. And you have parameter, you know, what element you want to restrict, what's the minimum number of words, what's the maximum number of words.
Okay.
So they do not care that much about writing the complex Xpath expression, because that will be
it's
part
just
of the abstract
it's just
pattern.
parameterized. Yep.
And then, so that itself already provides a very easy way for people to create custom Schematron rules. But on top of that, I also added like a customization of the UI in Oxygen to embed those rules within data topics in my case.
Okay.
Within the text of the style guide. And that makes it even easier, let's say. Plus, the abstract patterns can be documented. So when you present, let's say you have a library of abstract patterns and they can choose one of the rules, you can bring also that documentation to the users. The documentation for the rule itself and for the parameters to tell them what is expected to place in that specific parameter. So that's...
that sounds like excellent approach for reuse, when you are reusing the maximum words in many different contexts.
Each abstract patterns has a number
Yep.
of parameters, so it covers basically, yes.
Yep. In our case, I chose not to use abstract patterns because there's very little duplication. All of these are custom error messages, custom data integrity rules that are unique to the context. And so I need to use this language in these contexts. And so I felt that abstract rules was an unnecessary level of...
Yes. So regarding the message, one of the parameters for each of the rules is a message.
Yep.
So basically the user still controls the message.
Right.
The reuse simplifies the Xpath expression, so they don't need basically to enter the exact Xpath expression, but rather
Yep.
they
And
will set up some parameters, yes.
Yes, but we're not asking our users to do that. We're not asking our users to do the XPath. These two columns are just me and my colleague on the committee. And the reason we put that here is for checking the integrity of the line and for my fetch of the spreadsheet content in GitHub in order to synthesize the schematron. These are here not for the end users. Columns.
I was thinking that you allowed the end users to...
We do not.
Oh.
In fact, they don't have editing. They contribute to this with comments, and then Britta and I incorporate the comments into the final work. So columns K and L are implementation. Columns M and N are the only part that we ask for input from our users.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just that's the user.
I was thinking that because you use the spreadsheet, you want them to interact with that.
Not for columns K and L, no.
Okay.
No. I guess a crude way of saying that is that I don't trust them to, not that mine are perfect, but I don't trust my particular user community to know what to put in columns K and L. Another question.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I can see why, and I've done similar things myself, why you don't wish to put the burden of XPath knowledge on your users and have them provide the error messages which you're then interpreting.
Yep.
I think that makes a lot of sense. What I've had some success with in the past that non-technical users can contribute are examples and counterexamples.
Oh, excellent.
Which, for example, you can build into something like Xpath for Schematron and use to test your own rules to make sure that those examples and counterexamples are still valid. So perhaps that's something you might want to consider as well.
Yeah, examples and counterexamples. I think that could be very useful. Thank you. This is wonderful. This is the kind of feedback that I wanted in preparing this presentation for today. So I thank you for helping me. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Oh, right. Forget that.